Good afternoon, and welcome back to Freightwaves Future Supply Chain Conference here in Rogers, Arkansas. My name is David Hall. I'm the managing partner of Revolution's Rise of the Rest Seed Fund. We're a DC-based fund that invests in startups all across the U.S., excluding those based in San Francisco, New York, and Boston. And I have the pleasure and privilege to be here with Tyler Hughes. Tyler is the co-founder and CTO of Vizion, one of our portfolio companies. But Tyler, would love for you just to say hello, introduce yourself, and introduce Vizion to the crowd.
Hi, Tyler Hughes. Happy to be here. Again, Vizion is a API-first supply chain data vendor. We focus mainly on containerized freight and freight tracking, offering that through API form with a heavy focus on analytics and data insights.
So Tyler, let's start off. I mean, we're here at this awesome conference in Rogers, Arkansas, and there's so many companies, startups that are here talking and interacting among other large companies. Talk to us, when you and Kyle started Vizion, it was 2 people, it's now 30 plus people. What is it like starting and building a freight-focused startup in today's environment?
Yeah, I think we have an interesting perspective on this. We started the company actually right before things got really crazy during the pandemic. So we were coming at this problem fresh-faced, looking at it from just an industry problem point of view. It wasn't that this was an emergency and everything needed to be solved right away. We were just out to really solve the data pain points that we thought existed pre-pandemic. So starting a company in this and then kind of rolling into that has been a whirlwind, to say the least. But I think it's been really rewarding for us because we've been able to make a significant difference for a lot of businesses.
I think great startups are always started in times of turmoil, and because there's so many things, so much hair on fire. So it's great to hear that story. You mentioned sort of the world in which you've been starting this business. There's so much going on right now that we read about, sort of the shutdown and the slowdown and the bottlenecks at the ports. Talk a little bit about sort of why that's only part of the problem, the tip of the iceberg, as from the data that you guys have been able to collect and analyze.
Sure. I think early on a lot of the focus was mainly on what is the overall port congestion and why are all these boats kind of bunched up outside the ports. That was the main focus. That was what everybody was kind of questioning. And it was when are the boats going to berth? When are things actually going to come off the boat? That started to alleviate a bit. We've seen that start to let up. And I think what we started to realize as you look at supply chain as a whole, and you start to think about the whole of the industry, is that it's built up over a series of ebbs and flows. There's a number of components that are playing here, a number of components that are involved day to day, and they're all dependent on each other to operate smoothly. So where one format may be kind of improving, the other may be falling or failing. And so that ultimately leads to this image of supply chain as a whole being consistently stuck.
And when we've been talking before, you were talking about the difference between sort of the visual of it being stuck, but like the secret and the clues that are coming out of the data are showing, it's not just, containers that are stuck in the Port of Long Beach, but there's a longer data story that tracks all of sort of the slowdown. Talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing and how you're thinking about how you're able to track that well ahead of the container getting to the Port of Long Beach.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we focus mainly on containerized freight. We monitor containers all across the world for a number of our customers. So we are constantly tracking those containers and how they're moving across vessels. We also do a lot around data analytics and taking a look at how these shipments roll up at the higher level. So taking a look at customs data, a number of other data sources as well. We roll this back up into analytics. And so we're able, that coupled with our ability to track vessels and put all this together, we've been able to see, living in the data and looking at these points that, even though we're seeing a drop in vessel dwell times, we're seeing a drop in vessel wait times. There are fewer vessels waiting to get into port. There are fewer vessels waiting as at berth. Containers are coming off a little bit more quickly, but the problem is still in the port. We're still seeing congestion. Containers are not leaving the ports yet. And so, if you look at the data, that's rearing its head right now. We are seeing lower dwell times. Even, you've got the largest number of idle vessels
Yeah.
that we've probably seen in the last year right now. And so that looks good, right? It looks like less congestion, but at the end of the day, we're seeing the same amount of congestion or more based on the discharges, based on the container dwell times that we're able to measure, based on the length of time it takes for those gate ends to come back for the empty boxes.
So you're a data company.
Yeah.
How does data solve this problem? How do young companies focused on data help change and evolve some of the problems that are plaguing the industry?
Well, I think that's a big question, but
You're on a big stage.
That's a big question. So I think there are a number of ways that data can really kind of come into play. But I think the biggest thing is really if you take a step back and you just look at these two words, and it's data intelligence, right?
Yeah.
The first part of that is data. You need the data just to have a basic level of visibility. And we've talked time and time again lately around how visibility for TMSs these days is more or less table stakes. I think the next step there is making sure that the data that's feeding into these TMSs, that's feeding into these visibility platforms is as best a quality as we could possibly imagine, and that we are actually feeding in the correct data to these systems. And that's what we started Vizion at the get-go for, as you know, we had problems with data going into the visibility software to begin with, and we wanted to take a step back and solve that problem first. So I think the first thing is data acquisition. Do you want to either stand up a team of engineers to go and acquire this data, clean this data, standardize this data, enrich it, turn it into something that's usable for your applications? Or do you want to work with somebody and collaborate with somebody like Vizion to make this available to you and just start taking action and building that level of visibility for yourself? Similarly, going back to the intelligence part of data intelligence, I think the next step there is taking that data, taking the visibility that you have and rolling that up into insights, rolling that up at the aggregate level and understanding how are my shipments behaving? How are the carriers that I'm using behaving? How are overall are my shipments actually performing the way that I expect them to? Yeah. And based on the data points that I'm receiving, based on the dashboards that I'm looking at today, should I be making changes to my supply chain? Should I be working with different partners? Should I be augmenting the way that I'm doing things today?
And what's the big answer? Like if you're putting that in front of your customers and they're having this dashboard, what are their answers? What are their solutions? How are you seeing the data inform different behaviors on behalf of sort of the customers that you guys serve?
Well, I think some of the main ones right now are just allowing folks to get to that spot of being able to adapt to these changes in more real time. A lot of folks in this space are used to having to respond with very little notice or being far behind on the schedule there. So this puts them back in the power position of being able to respond to these events much more quickly and actually start to take action. But I think going past that, having this level of data visibility and having this level of insight allows them to really decide where they're going to move. I think some concrete examples are the shifting of ports, right? Should I be booking my freight on smaller boats? Should I be avoiding transshipments? Should I be moving to different ports and taking advantage of different trucking routes? Will my freight make it there quicker by utilizing this? Is my cost going to be lower? Yeah. These are things that you can start to measure and analyze when you have the data in front of you. And again, if you're not even building in this base layer for yourself, where are you? You're stuck in the dark.
So the other big thing that we're talking about and you hear about in the news is how global the entire supply chain has gotten, and how between a pandemic and geopolitical challenges around the world. I guess two questions for you on that is how reliable are all of these data sets, particularly those data sets that are coming from either developing nations or companies that are supporting maritime data flows. How reliable is the data, and how actionable is some of the third-party data that's sourced from international providers?
I would say overall the data feels relatively reliable. The problem is more so that the data is messy. It's incredibly messy, and if you are trying to build visibility for yourself or build some type of an observability layer for yourself, you've got a lot of work ahead of you just to start making sense of all of that data and turning it into something that looks usable.
Can you give an example of what you're talking about?
A great example is, connecting to 315s, parsing 315s from carriers. That's great data. It's reliable data for the most part, but one, it's a pain to process. You have to build a full engineering pipeline to actually ingest this data, parse that, have that available, make that usable across the multitude of carriers that you may be booking freight with, and they're all going to have different formats that they're going to send this messaging to you in. And even inside of that, each of the values are going to be differing as well. So you have a number of challenges ahead of you just in terms of kind of harmonizing these messages, even though they're the same message.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of the value of like really clear data visibility. Talk a little bit about the difference between sort of you can either have two kind of big standards for data, either open standards or sort of walled gardens. Talk about the benefits or challenges of building a data-driven solution when there are these two types of data sets, these closed data sets that are super proprietary and highly valuable, but versus more open data sets which enable a broader swath of developers to be able to find and build solutions on top of that data.
Sure. So I think if you're taking a broad look at that, there are probably two ways to really cut it. One is that there are these larger platforms that are more motivated to keep you inside of their ecosystem, and that's totally respectable. That's totally understandable. They are building in a different direction. They are also kind of more or less targeting the larger customers, the tail end, right? They're really looking at the top end of the market, and that leaves a lot of these smaller players left in the lurch and unable to get the same levels of access to data. And I think that's what we've really set out to do. And I think the other thing to really consider there too is with as many great TMS providers as there are out there, there's not necessarily a clear winner today. There are plenty of people building great solutions, and they're all somewhat tailored for different types of use cases. I think one of the great things about the approach that we've taken at Vizion is we've been able to build a data source and a data layer and an analytics layer that can be built and fed into any one of these existing TMSs. That can be built into any new work that you want to do. So you've got your own organization, you've got your own engineering team that doesn't want to focus on the data acquisition, doesn't want to focus on the analytics, but wants to build in operational insight, wants to build in actionable data, actionable events, and start to actually turn that into what your product is, turn that into your solution. Then we're a great partner to work with.
I love how that backs into the data plus intelligence, and how continuing to come back to that as you guys are building product. It's like, how do you take the right data and sort of create the actionable intelligence around that data? It makes me think and want to ask, your origin story is really interesting, and sort of how you came to this business. Tell us a little bit about sort of how freight, it's literally from where you grew up. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a carpet kid. I grew up in Tennessee. I'm from the Southeast. I started my tech career consulting from Tennessee. Moved out to the Bay Area. I've been working with startups there for about 10 years. But prior to that, growing up, freight and short haul, long haul trucking has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My parents owned a carpet shop. My grandfather owned a carpet shop. I remember taking naps and playing around in Averitt Express warehouses in Dalton, and I remember climbing over piles of carpet and Mohawk and things like that. So this has been something that's really been in my blood for a long time, which is funny because it's not something that I really came back to until the last 4 or 5 years. Been in Silicon Valley for the last last decade now, but did the regular Silicon Valley thing for a while before I found myself in the visibility space, and then understanding that I was really obsessed with container shipping.
And I think it's awesome, the marriage of obviously your origin story, and a lot of people have an origin story in their industry. They go to the Valley or go to one of these places where they get sort of indoctrinated in sort of core technology and tech development and product, and then they come back. Mm-hmm. And I love that circle. I love that full circle loop. As you think about it today, and you're recruiting in the Valley, you're looking at people, the extensibility into freight of sort of product, big tech product, small tech product. are you able to find great people and adapt them into the industry, or do you think it's better to bring people up from the industry and sort of teach them the technology?
I think there's opportunities for both, to be perfectly frank. I think there are plenty of great folks in this industry today that are poised to come in and play significant roles. But I also think that's one of the places that we've really excelled as a company with Vizion, is that we brought Silicon Valley to this space. And I think that's what a lot of other more successful companies have done as well. They've taken on this ethos of, Silicon Valley thinking, but not necessarily Silicon Valley company, right? And so that's really what we've tried to approach it from.
I love that, and that's the great line to end on. Silicon Valley thinking, but not a Silicon Valley company. Thank you, Tyler Hughes from Vizion. This was great. We'll be right back. Thanks.